Welcome to Section 4, Deep Dive into State Management. Over the course of this section, we're going to look at prioritizing global state over component state. We're going to learn to build a Flux store from scratch. We will get started with Vuex or Vuex. We're going to learn how to persist data in the local storage. And eventually, we're going to look at how to store data at a product like Firestore. What's a database type on Firebase? In this video, we're going to look at prioritizing global state over component state. We're going to look at why you should prefer global state over component state, basically every time. Also, we're going to move our custom collection out of the components and into a global place. So first of all, let's look at the issue we have here. If we treat our component state as something like a combination of different components, there are like some components called ABC and some other ones. And basically what happens, maybe the state of A is very much depending on the state of component B at one point. But also, component A needs part of the state from component C to show accumulation of the states. And eventually there are a bunch of other components that could need like states from all the other components. What this leaves you with is like your state and your necessity to rebuild the page is spread all over the components, and everything knows a little bit here and there, but it's very hard to know what is the exact state of everything, because all the components know is what is their current state. If we look at something like a global state, we have those components lying around anywhere, but in this case we do not care for the name SO at all. They could be anywhere. What would be important is, where is the state? And in this case, we have the state living from outside. So all the components do is if they require some information on the state, they basically pull it from a different source. And they don't care for the state of the other components, they just care for one place where the state is coming from. So why global? The easiest way is to say your page state can be built up from one place and one place only. In general, I would say what seems as an overhead up front, like structuring everything in different pieces, is very essential to guarantee that we have a clean data flow. Let's check out what this means for our code. If we look at our code, and here we have our app component, what's basically the root that we're going to use. But for Vue, there's actually a real root out there, and that's the one component that leverages the app component as its kind of core to render. In this case, this would be the main.js file. That's where we first mount our application and we render the app component basically as its content. So this seems to me like this could be the source of our data. But let's make it even better and let's pull it out here. We could say and define a store here, and we'll just call it store for now. And store should be nothing more than a plain object. In this case, what is the data that we actually care for? The data are our contacts. And we already have the contacts stored in our app file. So if we scroll down, that's where we first defined contacts. We used the model structures, a new model, the primary key, and the data is there already. So for now, let's just take this one. Remove the data set here completely. We don't care for this any longer. And let's move it over here. Of course, this means you also need to import model list where you actually need it. So we have a store, and this is how we want to store contacts. As we learned, Vue's reactivity system can pick up stuff from the outside world. So let's take a root instance. Let's define new data here. And in this case, we're going to just return store. What will be a reference to this object up here? So if we jerk back to app, we see there's still a reference to contacts here. So how do we get contacts in there? Let's quickly check our browser. Oh, I see my app is crashing. And accordingly, it's looking for something called contacts, but it's no longer available for me at all. There's a bunch of error and everything happens like underneath here. So let's try to fix the first one. In contacts, we first need to restore this value for us. So instead of using data directly, let's use a computed property. And let's call this one contact. So basically, this one should return an array consisting of all the contact data that we have. So we know that we have bounded to our root instance. So in Vue, we can access this root. The root is always pointing to the highest component in a structure. In the browser, if we check out this one, we see root is actually named root right here because it has no other name provided by us. But we see this one carries the context and the collection, all the data that we want. So we can access this component using this $root, and then we can use everything that's on there. So let's do this. This $root, in this case, we want to return contacts. And that should restore the contacts all method that we had before. And we need to call this one contacts, of course. So let's try in the browser. We now see that Jane and John are still there. We now see that Jane and John are actually there as we want to. So that's a good sign. Let's give it one other shot. Let's head over to our form component, or let's say the new one. That's where we struggled basically using the data and everything, and we don't know how to submit it because we do not know what's the current structure. Again, here we can access root. This, root, contacts, record, and let's for now just record the data as is. So let's see what happens. So in the browser, let's add a new contact. We call her Simone. I know Simone very well, so let's create a contact. And we see Simone popping up in our list. That's perfect. If we check the root data, we see that we now have 3 elements in the collection, where the latest one is now Simone. And we see like there's a bunch of other data in there that we currently do not have on the other ones. But for now, we also see the name is good, and we have a unique ID in there. So that all seems to work well. Let's do one final thing. If we click on those contacts, we see there's the detail page, so the show one. So let's try to get access of the actual object that we have stored for this contact. So let's switch to our show component. And here we see we still print out the user ID. So we have access to the actual user ID of that user. So instead of the user ID, let's print out the contact. All we're going to do is now create a computer property. We'll call it contact. And again, we're going to access the root collection. By default, ModelList exposes a find method for us that we can use to identify by primary key. By default, that's ID, so that perfectly matches what we have in user ID. So let's say this.userid. There's one little caveat for ModelList. If we return one entry, you get like an entry object that gives you more methods. So for now, just call fold. On this one, what will give you the raw object underneath. So let's see if this works. Perfect. We see John. Here we have access to Jane. And if we go create a new contact here, I accidentally deleted it apparently. So let's click on Simone. And here Simone is there. Perfect. We have everything that we want from our data, and it's all coming from one place, what makes it way more convenient to access and alter the data.